Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. I am so glad that you have taken the time to join us to dig into the Word of God and learn what He has to say. Again, we're in the book of James. We'll be here for probably the next 15 weeks as we dig into a verse by verse study of this incredibly practical book. We talked about some of that last week, the practicalities, but it really is a how to. The Christian life, so many people say, I've tried it and I'm just not any good at it. And the wonderful thing about this little book is while it is short on doctrine, it is long on practicality. And so today we're going to just jump in to the how to, and our how to today is a pretty important thing. How to know what to do when you don't know what to do. If you have lived for any amount of time, you have run into times when you've done everything you know that is supposed to be done, but you're just still feeling uneasy about the direction and know that you need just a little more. So I'm having some trouble with the thing moving up, so I'm going to go back to that and start over, and we'll see if we can't get that to forward for us. Okay, and you guys see all that? And then we'll go to slideshow. All right, now we're moving. Okay, how to know what to do when you don't know what to do. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for your word and for all that you have given us. Lord, I know you know because you put it in the word, that there would be times in our lives when we are just kind of lost and lacking in the wisdom that we need to move forward. So, Lord, I pray that you would take this passage of scripture and that you would so personalize it to those who are listening, so that each instance of where they are in their life, you would give them the wisdom that they need. We thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's get going by reviewing just a little bit of the verses that we went through last week, because they're going to lead right into where we are. It's so important when we're studying God's word that we remember the context. We just can't grab verses and make something out of them without having the context, because when we do that, we miss so much of what it's really trying to say and often can get it quite wrong. So let's just review a little bit from last week, the beginning of the chapter, where James says, consider it. Think about, let this be your permeating, influencing thought. Consider it all joy, pure joy, not fake, not pretense, but pure joy when you encounter various trials, knowing, so that's something that we know. Here's a knowledge. We know this, the testing of our faith produces endurance. We get stronger. And let endurance have its perfect result. And what's the result of that endurance? That we are perfect. That means we're mature, we're grown up, we're complete. That means we're not just mature in one place, but in other places in our life, we're a balanced person. And then it says, lacking in nothing. So that when we release ourselves, we lean into these trials and these difficult things, that God brings something out of it, and we grow and come out the other end a stronger person than we were. But this last phrase here is interesting because it says, and we talked about this last week, that when we are living this kind of lifestyle, that there is nothing that we need that we don't have. We are lacking in nothing. And yet, the next verse, where our passage starts today, starts off with this word, but. And this is life. The word but, the conjunction here, is a wonderful little word. And what it often does is it negates the stuff that came before it. Like when we talk to our spouse, well, I love you, but you really get on my nerves. The second part kind of negates the first part. It's a conjunction that says there's something that's just a little wonky, maybe, with the application of the first part to the second. And we know that. We know that, hey, we're trying to serve the Lord. We're trying to consider it all joy. We're trying to grow and be more mature in spite of difficulties. But, and here's the interesting thing here when we get into this, but if any of you lacks. Now, what did the verse previous just say? That when we're serving the Lord, we're considering it all joy, we're leaning into the difficulties, that will lack nothing. But here's reality. We know that even though there are things we know about serving the Lord, we know about the scriptures, we still find ourselves sometimes falling short. He just told us we'll lack nothing if we have endurance. And then he says, oh, by the way, if any of you does happen to lack. And so here's where we get into this. He says, if any of you is lacking, and here's what the word that he uses of what we're lacking wisdom. Now, in these first verses, he talked about knowledge. We know certain things. We know that our endurance produces strength, it produces growth. And there's one thing to have knowledge, there's another thing to have wisdom. They are not the same thing. We have all known people who are full of knowledge, and yet they are not wise people at all. Put them out on the street, drop them off in the desert somewhere, and they're going to have no idea how to survive. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Knowledge is knowing something intellectually. Wisdom is knowing how to apply that knowledge to the circumstances in which we live so that the knowledge actually does us some good. Because it's one thing to have all the knowledge, it's another thing to know what to do and how to apply that. Now, how do we typically get wisdom? Well, those of us that I'm looking at, we've lived long enough to know that most of our wisdom comes from experience. Now, some of us are smart enough to get wisdom from watching the experiences of other people. You've had siblings who were older than you, and you watch the stuff that they did, and you learn, okay, that was stupid. Let's not do that. And then others of us, we are the kind of people that can't learn from others' experience. We have to experience it ourselves. No matter what somebody tells us, we've got to jump out there and do it ourselves. So typically, we learn from experience. Mama says the stove is hot. That's knowledge. Okay, the stove is hot. But we don't really get the wisdom of dealing with that stove until we put our hand on it or seen someone else put their hand on it. Then we get wisdom. You don't touch the stove. Now, the longer we live, the more we experience and learn. So from that, who should be the wisest people? You know, those who've lived a little bit. Older people. Let me just say this. If you are young and starting out in serving God, or starting out in a job, or you've just had kids or just gotten married and you're just kind of lost what to do, there is absolutely nothing wrong with going to somebody older than you and asking for a little bit of wisdom and help from people who've been through that before. Ask someone who's been there. And that's exactly what James tells us. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. One of the reasons that we don't have the wisdom to apply the knowledge that we have is because we get a little prideful or get a little afraid of asking, and we just don't ask. There's no shame in admitting that we don't know something. But we're in an age where we don't seem to ask people for much anymore. This was real to me. Oh, it was probably a couple years ago. I was cooking and the recipe called for buttermilk, and I didn't have buttermilk, but I knew there was some substitute that you could use. And so I immediately went to the computer to Google substitute for buttermilk. And it went through my mind, what on earth did we do before Google? And then I realized before Google, I would have called my mom and said, what do you substitute for buttermilk? And so in that, I got to thinking, we're losing something here when we always go to these electronic sources. And so I shut down my laptop, called my mom, asked her, what do you substitute for buttermilk? Now, granted, calling my mom cost me 30 minutes to find out the answer when Google would have cost me 30 seconds. But the relationship, the knowledge, the wisdom that comes from asking other people who have a little bit more ahead of us. Now, it's one thing to ask our mom, one thing to go to older people. It's another thing to do what James says here. If any of you lack wisdom, don't just ask God. So basically what he's saying, hey, If you're lacking wisdom, if you are stuck and you don't know what to do, what the next step is, how to respond to the situation that you're in, James says, pray. Now, unfortunately, this sounds kind of trite because even as Christians, oftentimes we hear this, well, I'll pray for you. Why don't you pray about it? And we take that so tritely. And we often say things like, well, I've done everything else I know how to do. I might as well just pray, as if that's the last resort. When James tells us here, when you're really lacking wisdom and you need that, there are times, my friends, when our own thought processes, the things we've tried, the people we've gone to just don't cut it. We've been working, we've been trying to figure out, how do I count COVID-19 as all joy? Then we need wisdom and we need to ask God. Find yourself still lacking? Pray. Now, one of the things that we struggle with in asking God, there are reasons, and I ask myself in putting this lesson together, why do we take so much time to just go to God and ask Him? And I think there's about three things here. Why don't we ask? One of them is we don't always want to ask God for wisdom because we believe that we are undeserving. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you are. We are undeserving. We are unworthy of God giving us one blooming thing. But here's the deal, that's irrelevant because He told us to ask Him. He just did. If you lack wisdom, ask me. You're deserving it. Your worth of receiving it doesn't even come into play. Now, we understand this as a parent, even those of us with adult kids, deserving or not, if we've told them, hey, if you run into trouble with that, call me. Now, when they call, we don't just say, well, do you really think you deserve this? No, we told them to call. So when they call and say they need help, they need to borrow the truck, whatever, their deserving it is irrelevant because we told them to call. So we need to get past this feeling like, oh, I'm unworthy to come to God to ask Him. Just stop it. Your worth is irrelevant. Another reason we don't often ask God for what we need is this belief that our needs are not worthy of attention, that this is some small thing. God is busy dealing with President Trump and all his business. God is busy over in Iraq somewhere. He's in China having to deal with persecuted Christians. And I just have this little bitty thing that I don't know how to deal with. And we need to stop getting that because this kind of belief leads us to try to figure it out on our own. Because we think this is just a little thing that God's not worried about. So we try to figure it out on our own. And you know what we typically do? We blow it. This is one of the things that I love about kids. When you're working with little kids, you get to hear their prayer requests. I love the prayer requests of kids because they get this. They will bring the smallest, trivial things. When our son Eric was about 2, we're out mowing the lawn, and there was an unfortunate meeting of the lawnmower and a baby bunny, and the lawnmower won. And Eric was out riding on Dad's lap on the mower, and he came running in afterward and wanted me, we have to pray bunny, pray bunny. And for like 2 weeks after that incident, every time we would pray over a meal, he had 2 words, pray bunny. Why? Because he believed that that bunny was important to God, and he believed that he could take that to God. I love that faith of little kids. He believed with everything he had that God cared for that bunny. Listen, if God cares about sparrows and baby bunnies who run into lawnmowers, He cares about you. Your need is worthy of His attention. So we need to put this false belief out of our mind. Another reason that we may not want to ask God for the wisdom is this belief that we need an explanation for what is happening before we can move on to receive it. See, I struggle with this. I'm in the middle of something and I need help, and I want God to tell me why this is happening. Why did that person treat me this way? Why did this thing happen? How do I understand that? And before I can move on to getting the wisdom and actually using it, I have to wait until I understand it all. I find for myself, that I often can't see the answer right in front of me because I'm stuck in my emotions and I'm not ready to receive the wisdom of what to do next because I want to wallow in it for just a little bit longer. And I know that if I ask God for wisdom, he's going to want me to move on. Now, there's many other reasons that we don't ask God, but the main point I want you to get here is that all your excuses are irrelevant because God has told you, hey, if you're lacking the wisdom you need, ask me. Ask me. And here's what he says. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives. Now, this is something that we need to work through. Sometimes we're afraid to ask God because we're afraid of what he'll ask us to do. I understand this as a kid, and my kids probably understand the same way. Sometimes we don't want to go to ask dad because we know if we go to ask dad, we're going to get a lecture first of what we should have done and what we didn't do right. And then maybe we'll get some of the wisdom. And oftentimes we have this view of God the same way. He is up there making our lives difficult just so we'll grow. And he's not interested in helping us because he wants us to toughen up, be strong, be a man, deal with it, get your endurance in there. But that's the wrong view of God. Look what it says here in James 1. It says that God is a giver. God who gives. It is his character to give. There are people who are just givers and those who are not. We all know them. There are some people, you can't go anywhere with them and say, oh, wow, I love that. That'd be great to have. Next thing you know, they're on Amazon sending it to you and it's at your door. It's their character. It's their nature. There are other people who are not going to give you the time of day. It's not their character. But God is one of those who is a giver. Matter of fact, the author of Hebrews tells us that he who comes to God must believe that he exists, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And we've gotten some wrong ideas about God. But yet, if we go to a biblical view of God, he's a rewarder, he is a giver. I met a guy like this not that long ago, Mr. Chambers. He's an older fellow. And I went over to visit him at his house, and I get there, and he's got this dumpster out in front of the house, and he's just getting rid of stuff. And so I walk in the house, and all of a sudden he's saying, you know what, you need this vase. Why don't you take that? And I remember saying, oh, I love that little thing hanging on the wall. Wrong thing to say. Next thing I know, it's in my hands. Before I left his house, my trunk was full of stuff I didn't even know I needed. This is the kind of giver that God is. Stuff we didn't even know we need. And he's wanting to give it to us. That's how God gives. Now, we all know people who are givers, but not necessarily good givers. There are those who give and then take it away if we don't live up to their expectations. There are others who will give something to you, but you will pay the rest of your life. And I have to admit, I'm guilty of this sometimes with my kids. Hey, I gave you life. You owe me here. You need to do something nice for mom because I went through labor. Some people will make you perform, jump through hoops. What kind of giver is God? James tells us what kind of giver he is. Let's look at what he says here. First off, he is a giver without prejudice. He gives to all. God is an equal opportunity giver. You don't have to deserve. You don't have to be worthy. Listen, you're not worthy or deserve because we know ourselves. We're just not. Yet God desires to give. That's why he gave his son. We weren't worthy of that. He is not a prejudicial giver. He gives to all. So the first thing we see about is that God gives to all, and he gives generously. I have a friend that works for the post office, and every year the post office does that food drive where there's a certain Saturday, I think it's in the fall, and they put that bag and you stick your food in it, and then they take it and use it for a food drive. And I have a friend that's postman. He said, it amazes me when we go to sort all this food, the kind of stuff that people give us, expired cans of beets, this stuff that they went through their pantry and go, oh, I don't even want this. Let's give it to the poor. They will want an expired can of beets. But that's not how God gives. He gives generously. God gives the good stuff, and he delights in giving it to you. So he gives without prejudice. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to be worthy. And he gives generously. And I love this one. He gives without reproach. We all know what it is to go to someone and ask for help, and we'll get it. But first, we're going to get a lecture. We're going to get a condescending sort of attitude that just tells us, is it even worth coming to this person? And I've known people who really were generous people, and yet nobody would go to them. And they'll ask, why doesn't anybody ever call me to help? Well, one of the reasons is that when anybody asks you for help, you make them feel so stupid and undeserving that it's not worth it to go to you. We've known those kind of people, haven't we? And yet God is not that kind of giver. This is the key, and we're gonna unlock that key here in just a minute in the next part of the passage. But he gives to all generously without reproach, and get the next line here, and it will be given. So if we see here, let him ask, whoops, I hit the wrong button. Let him ask of God, and it will be given to him. It will be given. Oftentimes we believe that God is capable of giving us something, but we don't believe he's willing to do it. We think he's withholding that. I've had people say, I know God answers prayer, but in my case, he's made an exception. Well, let's look at what we're talking about here on getting prayers answered. What are we asking God for in this instance? Wisdom. Can I just say, from the scriptures, I can say this. If you ask God for wisdom, you can receive it. You will receive it when you ask for wisdom. Now, this isn't the same as asking God for a new car and a cure for cancer and all of that. And there's those who teach that. If they're teaching you that, you might need to look into a little more biblical understanding, because God is not a genie. But in this instance, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and it will be given to you. This is a prayer that God answers. You need wisdom, he'll give it to you. Now, James is going to give a little caveat here, because the next verse, he's going to say, there are some who might ask for wisdom and then not receive it. Why? Well, we get that little word again, but. So here's a caveat on what we just said. But if you're going to ask God, you must ask a certain way. Look what it says here. He must ask in faith. In faith. And then it goes on to give us a word picture. So let's just take a look at that word picture. He must ask in faith without any doubting. And then it describes this person who doubts. It says, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. So here is a person, and picture the sea. If you've been to the ocean, you've seen this. It comes in, it goes out. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. It's driven and tossed by the wind. Whatever the circumstances are around the water is just simply pliable, and it just depends on the circumstances. We have all known these kind of people. Sometimes we've been this kind of person, where the circumstances around us determine our faith. Now, let me just make a side here. We're not talking here about saving faith. We're not saying that, if you're saved, but yet you have some doubts, you're not really saved. That's not the kind of faith here that James is referring to. What James is referring to is the sustaining faith, that belief that keeps you going when everything else around you is crazy, and beating against that belief, you still stand solid, consistent, even when everything else around you is unstable. You stand at that graveside with no understanding of why and what and how, but you still say, I believe God. Now, there are some people, their circumstances determine whether they trust the sustaining power of God. And we've all met people like this. This is actually an epidemic in the body of Christ. There are the people who come to God in faith, and there are the people who come to God in worry. They're not happy if there's not something to worry about. They're so worried that if there's nothing to worry about, that worries them because things are going so good, the shoe's going to drop and everything's going to fall apart, and they can't embrace the joy of things that are happening good in their life because they're so worried about losing it. And then they worry about that. They can't enjoy the Lord and his goodness because they're constantly in doubting. Now, when we are like this, we need to look at what is it that we are doubting when we are in this kind of situation. What is it that we doubt? Number one, we are doubting God's character, doubting that God really is good. Because somehow we've gotten this weird theology that tells us that if there are bad things in our lives, that means that God is bad. And we oftentimes blame God for things the devil has done, things that we have done that are just simply natural consequences to wrong actions. And we get mad at God as if God is up there and he's mean and he's hateful. God's character is goodness. It is love. That is who he is. Every good and perfect gift comes from God. We're going to see that in this chapter here in another week or so. And so we doubt God's character, that he's good. We doubt that he's generous. We doubt that he really cares about us. Another thing that we doubt when we're like this, we get all involved with worry, is we doubt God's purpose. We talked last week about knowing that there is a purpose for everything we go to. We see a trial, a difficulty in our life, something we don't understand. And we know that James says that there was a purpose, but we see it and all of a sudden that purpose disappears and we doubt that. And so we're doubting when we come to God and say, oh, I need wisdom, but I'm not really sure if you'll give it to me. I'm not sure if you're generous. I'm not sure that there's any purpose to any of this. Another thing that we doubt is God's promises, that he really meant it when he said, I will be with you. We feel alone, and so we assume that we are alone. And so we doubt the promises of God. Now, here's what James says about this kind of person. That kind of person, that man, who this presence of doubt negates the presence of faith. So remember, we're not talking about saving faith. We're not talking about salvation here. We're talking about the kind of faith that receives the wisdom from God that we need. When we have that kind of doubt, it negates our faith. We should believe that God will give us wisdom when we need it. But James adds a caveat here. There are some people that ought not to expect that God is going to give them anything. That's what he says. That man, that doubting man, that's like the waves, just their circumstances always determines who they are and what they do. That man ought not to expect that he will receive anything, not just wisdom, but anything from the Lord. Why? Because he's unworthy? No, we just saw that God gives to all. Because God is mad at him? No. Because he doesn't deserve it? No. We need to understand that for God to bless things, they must be blessable. I've said that many times. We stand oftentimes and we'll sing, God bless America. And I said, well, America has to be blessable before God can really bless it. We need to be behaving in a way that God has said he can bless, because there's some things that God will not bless. It's incongruent with his character. When we are the kinds of people who are tossed always back and forth with the circumstances of life, regardless of when things are good or bad. We are those people who are just always full of turmoil, full of doubting, full of complaining, focusing on the problems rather than the solution. These people should not presume that God will bless them with wisdom, not because God won't give it, but because they cannot receive it. I had a woman call me one time in my office, and she just talked my ear off, and like 15 minutes before I got a word in edgewise. And I kept waiting for her to ask for money. She didn't. What she was asking for was prayer. But here was her situation. She had an issue in her house that she wanted fixed. And there was a company that specialized in fixing that, and they had a grant that would provide for the need that she had, and she qualified for it. The only caveat was they said, we have to come to your house and make sure that the material that we have is what will work with your system. And she simply said, no, you're not coming to my house. If I qualify for the money, you send me the money and I will get it fixed the way I want it fixed. And they said, no, we can't do that because we have to make sure before we use this money that it's going to work with your circumstance. So she calls me and she doesn't ask for anything except prayer. Here's what she wanted me to pray. Pray that this company will change its mind and just send me the money without having to come in and making me follow these guidelines. Okay, lady, I'm going to pray with you, but I'm not going to pray for a miracle of changing the company. I'm going to pray that you understand that if you want this company to help you, you have to follow their guidelines. It's not that they're unwilling to help you. They are wanting, it's the reason that they exist is to come in and do this kind of work, but you can't receive it because you are unwilling to receive it in the way that it will actually work. These people are not just going to send you a check with money that they receive from a grant that they have to provide accountability for. Listen, we cannot pray that God will give us anything if we have already made clear that we are not willing to follow the guidelines that he has established for us. Not because he's mean, not because he's unable to give it to you or won't give it to you, but because it won't work. It simply won't work. You ask God for wisdom in your relationships, and yet you continue to be mean and ugly and gossip. And you ask God for wisdom. Well, he gives you the wisdom that says, stop being so mean, stop being ugly to people, and it'll work. But he can't give you that wisdom because you won't receive it. And that's all that this verse is saying. It's not saying that God has favorites and you have to have this certain level of faith. And if you don't have this faith, that God's not going to give you anything. No, it's not that he won't give it. It's that you won't receive it. Do you see where the responsibility lies here? Because we already saw in the passage that if you ask God for wisdom, he will give it. But it's one thing for God to give it. It's another thing for us to be able to receive it. And here's why James says some people can't receive wisdom, because they are a double-minded man. Now, this is an interesting word here. So I put the Greek there and then the transliteration there for you to be able to see what this word, because we recognize part of this word, the psyche. This is the word that we translate soul, which in the Greek understanding is the mind, the will, and the emotions. And James, actually, this word is not found anywhere else in Greek literature, nowhere except James. I think he made the word up. I understand that because I make words up all the time. And so he uses this word soul, the mind, the will, the emotions, and then he adds a prefix to it, the prefix di. And we know that prefix. We see it in words like dissect, diverse. It means to cut into two is what it means. So what James is saying by double-minded, he's saying this person has two souls, two wills, two sets of emotions. And he's not a single soul. He's not singularly focused. He's trying to have two minds. He's thinking this way and he's thinking this way. And these things are going opposite ways in his mind. He's trying to go this way and this way at the same time. It doesn't work. One of my favorite books is Pilgrim's Progress. And in Pilgrim's Progress, it's a great book. If you haven't read it, go grab it. It's out everywhere. It's old, but it's out everywhere. It's from the 1600s. Second best-selling book in English after the Bible. And in this book, we see Christian. It's an allegory. Christian is making his way toward the celestial city, and he runs into people through the book, and their names define their characters. And as he is walking along, one of the people that he runs into is this man whose name is Mr. Let me find it. I opened my wrong thing here. Yeah, here we go. Mr. Facing Both Ways. And here's how he describes this job. As a waterman, I look one way and row the other, facing both ways, trying to go one way while looking another way. And this simply will not work. It just will not work. There's a story about an incident with a train. This was in Spain. And I just love this illustration because it illustrates this so perfectly. It had two engines, one at the front and one at the back, one that pulled and one that pushed. And when it got into this tunnel, and it was a rather long tunnel, the first engine ceased to work. I can't remember what it was that happened to it, but it stopped working. And so the engine in the back realized, okay, we're not going to be able to go forward. So he decided to put it in reverse, and he would just pull them out of the tunnel. So as he starts, and there's no cell phones in these days, so the two engines were not communicating with each other. So as he starts to pull backwards out of the tunnel, the first engine then got running again, and he tried to go forward. So the engine in the front was trying to move forward, while the engine in the back was in reverse, trying to move out of the tunnel. And remember, they're in a long tunnel. Both of these engines are working, and the carbon monoxide that are coming out of both these engines working so hard, the train is not moving. Instead, it was poisoning the people inside it. This is one of the worst train disasters that has happened in the history of trains, because so many people in the trains died because of the carbon monoxide, but they weren't moving forward because they were trying to go two directions at once. That's the picture that James wants us to see here. We can't be double souled. We can't be trying to go this direction and trying to go this direction at the same time. When we try to do that, it says here, we are unstable in all our ways. So why should the double-minded man expect not to receive? Well, because he's asking even though the answer may be right in front of him. I want us to see this passage, and then we're just about done. I want us to see this passage from Eugene Peterson's The Message. It's a paraphrase rather than a translation of the scripture, but it's often very picturesque. Listen to how Peterson uses this passage. If you don't know what you're doing, pray. Ask God, pray to the Father. He loves to help. You'll get his help and won't be condescended to when you ask for it. So ask boldly, believingly, without a second thought. Do you see what that means? There's second thought. I'm asking, but I've got another thought here in the back of my mind. Ask without a second thought. People who worry their prayers are like wind, whipped waves. Don't think you're going to get anything from the master that way. Adrift at sea, keeping all your options open. The issue is not the master. The issue is that we can't receive. Why is it that we can't receive? Why can't double-minded people expect to receive wisdom? Well, oftentimes because they've got so much going on in their mind, all these second thoughts back here pulling both ways, that the answer may be right in front of them, but they can't even see it. Mr. Facing Both Ways can't get his prayers answered because he's rowing one way while looking the other. God can't give you an answer when you're trying to go both ways at once. When I lived in Council Bluffs, Iowa, I had this family of squirrels that lived on my street, and these were the stupidest animals. Because what would happen, I get out of, I'm in the driveway, I'm going down the street, and here's this squirrel, and he runs out in front of my car, and then he stops, looks at me, and runs about 2 feet this way. Then he stops again, runs about 3 feet the other direction, also still in front of my car, just back and forth, cannot make up his mind. And I'm about ready to run the squirrel over just to put both of us out of our misery. You've probably had those squirrels on your street too. And that's what we're looking at. It's a stupid animal. And how many times does God look at us running back and forth, back and forth? We cannot make up our mind, trying to go two directions at once, and we can't get anywhere. Not because God is mean, but because we have got to learn how to be singularly focused. And James is going to tell us about that and give us some good counsel on that in the next few verses that we'll get to in another week. Can't expect to receive anything from the Lord when you're unstable in your faith. And we in the body of Christ have no reason to be unstable. So when you don't know what to do, according to this passage, number one, ask God for wisdom to apply the knowledge that you already have. Most of the time, the answer we already have in knowledge. We just don't know how to apply it. So ask God for that wisdom. And when you ask him in faith believing. What does James tell us to believe? Believe that God is a giver. He is a giver to you. One of the other things, that lady on the phone that called me about that company, was I said, you can pray about this too. And she said, no, I don't want to pray. God doesn't listen to me. I didn't even know this lady. She just called me up out of the blue because I worked in a church office. She said, God doesn't listen to me. He listens to people like you. Not true. Believe that God is a giver to you. Number three, believe that God will give it to you. Number four, believe that God will give it to you generously, that God wants to do that. It is his character. He is not a miser up in heaven holding everything back from you. He will give generously, and believe that he'll give it to you willingly. You don't have to beg. You don't have to scream. You just need to receive it. And then you must stand fast in that belief, regardless of the circumstances. The circumstances are the waves in the ocean. Single focused. I believe God. He may not give me that wisdom today. He may not even give it to me next week. But until he does, I am going to continue the course of action that I am on, trusting and believing that he is giver, generous, willing, and that I receive it, and it's probably right in front of me. Start looking. Let me pray with you. Father, you know us. You know that we struggle, Lord. We just do. We have all this knowledge in here about who you are. We read the Bible and we believe it, but so many times combined with that belief is a bunch of unbelief here in the back of our mind. And we're like that man in the book of Mark who came to you and he says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And so that is our prayer today, that in the middle of our belief, this little bit of doubting, this wavering, this trying to go two directions with second thoughts in the back of our mind, Lord, I pray that you would make us singularly focused believers, where we have one face, one soul, one will, who is headed straight forward in faith believing that you are a generous God and that all that we need is right here within our grasp and that we lack nothing. You have provided everything we need for faith and godliness. So Lord, we believe, help our unbelief. And this week, would you guide us into the strength that you have for us? We thank you for it in advance. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.